Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Today we're going to be talking about storytelling basics and elements. And so when we think about storytelling, when we think about a good story, it's something that really resonates with us, or it's something that helps have us immersed in a world that we're not familiar with or that we're fascinated by. For me, one piece of intellectual property or one franchise that has really gotten me is Stranger Things. That show has done a phenomenal job of summoning many different pieces of 80s nostalgia, and it has also done a terrific job of not only staying true to the decade, but also surprising audiences, providing a story that on the surface seemed simple at first, but has since become incredibly and wildly and entertainingly complex. And so how they get there and how these stories become so engrossing and so appealing to audiences really is the result of a lot of careful scaffolding, creative scaffolding, if you will. And this notion of carefully constructing and building and erecting a story that is logical, that makes sense for the universe that it's in, of course, and that is palatable, that's digestible for the audience. And so when we're going through these elements, I want you to be thinking about your own stories that you want to tell and thinking about, well, I need to do this or I need to do that, or how does this impact my own story? And I think this is going to help give you that sound foundation for storytelling. So let's dive in. Aristotle. We cannot talk about Aristotle without mentioning that his work, Poetics, the first thing he noted was that all stories have a beginning, middle, and end. And it's important here to think about that because as complex as some of these stories may be, and as daunting the challenge may be to say, oh my gosh, I have to come up with a story, how do I do this? It's really important to recognize your story may have 3 or 4 acts, and that it will have a beginning, middle, and end, and that you can really start at any point and build out. And so that should give you some comfort when you're structuring how your story will churn out. Let's move on to the next slide. So key elements in a story, we're going to be going through these today. The theme, characters, plot, settings, conflict, rising action, climax, drama, comedy, heightening, and motivation as well. And all of these elements together, if they're carefully blended, like a Starbucks Frappuccino, sorry, right now there is the shift from summer to fall, so I'm seeing all these pumpkin spice lattes and other Frappuccino drinks all over my advertising feeds and stuff, and so I had to make the reference. But if it's carefully blended, like a Starbucks Frappuccino, like a cup of coffee, wherever you drink your coffee, then it tastes good, right? If we think about, the perfect Frappuccino, the perfect coffee for you, you might take cream, milk, or half and half, or coconut milk, or you might take sugar or raw sugar or this or that, and you might take 1 pump of mocha, or maybe it's just 2 pumps of unsweetened hazelnut. All of those elements I just listed, that's your blended drink. And if it's done well, it tastes good, and we recognize that it's good. But when it tastes bad, it's kind of ugh. And sometimes we don't know why a story doesn't work out. It just feels gamey, or the texture is off, or it doesn't taste well. As your audience members will tell you, they'll know when something doesn't feel right in a story structure. And so it's important to recognize that each element that we're going through today really has great import when we're thinking about how to structure a storyline. Let's move along. So theme, as Denzel Washington is showing us, this is a clip or photo for that matter from Fences, a highly recommended movie, by the way. He did an awesome performance, but what else would we expect from Denzel aside from near perfection? A theme is the movie message. It is the premise. And so you want to think about, what is your story going to be talking about? What is the theme here? Is it hunger? Is it not knowing your identity? Is it finding yourself? Is it coming of age, going from a child to an adult? So yes, themes are abstract. They may not be specific, and they really shouldn't be. If you were thinking about themes from, Fences, Fences is about somebody who missed an opportunity to be something. That's the character Denzel Washington plays, and unfortunately, he does take it out on the rest of his family. And so that's a theme, this notion of missing your opportunity in life, or missing an opportunity to be something more, in this case, to be a ball player. If we think of the movie 8 Mile, Eminem's great movie about his life, semi-autobiographical take on his life. The theme there was taking every opportunity that you have and never giving up and being forthright and believing in yourself. Those are themes, right? Those are very abstract, they're very general. They might even be a bit nebulous, but themes are very powerful. I was at a Los Angeles fellowship. I was lucky enough to be in an LA fellowship last November from the shooting of this episode, almost a year. And one of the TV executives, or it might have been one of the film executives, either way, they had stated that, the idea or theme of whatever it was, TV show it must have been, because it was a TV-oriented conference, that's more important than the script. It's interesting. The idea is more important than the script, the actual plot, what actually goes on. And that's a reference to the theme. What is it that you're really talking about here? Is it just two sisters fighting over a sweater that one borrowed from the other? Or is it coming of age? Do these girls actually grow up and become adults when their parents are tragically killed in a car accident? Is that really the linchpin, the underpinning of the movie or the TV show or the book or whatever you're trying to create? So you want to really think about that as you're moving along. And I think some of the best movies have really been able to touch upon that. I think with Stranger Things, it touches upon the unknown and being open to accept things out there that we don't understand. The X-Files also capitalized on that theme of the unknown and being open to that. If you had to summarize what the X-Files was in a sentence, I think the theme would touch upon that. What happens when your perception of reality is bent or thrown askew? That's the X-Files in a sentence. And they did a remarkable job of doing that on that show. And so that's what you want to kind of think about when you're thinking of a theme. Let's go back to that slide. And so the TV message for Modern Family is that all types of family can exist aside from the traditional nuclear family, right? That's kind of a theme there. The theme for Titanic could be that love never dies, right? Rose is, I believe, at the time of the movie, she's got to be about 90 years old, and she still loves Leo DiCaprio, right? Love never dies. The movie message for Fences, as I said earlier, is that, the past can undermine your present. And so you want to think about, what you're trying to capture story-wise based on the theme. Let's move along. Characters. Characters are what help you move the theme along. And they should be emblematic of the theme, and they should help push your narrative along. And your examination of the theme should be explored through these characters. If your story surrounds coming of age with in a town with a drug cartel, do you need a greedy younger man? Do you need a greedy older man? You always want to go back to the theme and ensure that all characters are relevant to your story. You want to think about, is this character pro-theme or anti-theme? If the character is anti-theme, do you need him? If it's a theme about identity, and if it's a movie about immigration and it deals with identity and knowing yourself or not knowing yourself, do you need someone who thinks she is Irish American in the movie, but then finds out that she is the product of illegal immigrants from El Salvador? Is that useful? Is that not useful? How does that further along the plot? And along this theme of understanding your own identity, does it work? And so you want to think about whether or not a character possesses the viewpoint of your story. You'll need to decide if the character controls the point of view or not as well. Some characters may, some characters might. It depends upon how you want to tell this story. Let's move along. Dialogue. Dialogue helps further along the story, and it makes sure that your audience is guided along. You can do a lot of metaphorical or symbolic stuff, I should really say. You can do a lot of symbolic stuff when you are erecting and construing a story together. You know, somebody who carries their mother's prayer beads is symbolic of being Catholic. It's symbolic of tradition. It's symbolic of, you know, not forgetting the past. All of those things could be conveyed by holding prayer beads, for sure. And you want to think about those moments in which you can convey symbolic meaning. Dialogue is a little bit more straightforward and deliberate in moving along the plot. I'm not really sure, said Tom, versus I'm not really sure. Tom frowned. So you want to be specific when you're writing down dialogue or when you're thinking about how a character might talk. Be economical. Don't waste any words in your dialogue. Everything that a character says must belong. There should be no fat. Lean dialogue is important. It's okay if your character talks for a minute without interruption. Every word better be important, though. Don't just do it to fill up a page. It doesn't make sense to. An entertainment Bible is very useful here. I've written a few myself, and they're very, very good when you're trying to put together creative works. I myself, right now, am working on a few TV scripts in my spare time with a few buddies we're hoping to submit in the future. And the goal here is to make sure that with a TV Bible, all of the rules apply. So a TV Bible or an entertainment Bible is this notion of what can we do, what can't we do in an entertainment world, in an ecosystem, in a transmedia ecosystem, whatever it is. And so it might be certain settings that must be incorporated into the series. It might be certain character profiles that must be upheld and honored during writing. If I tell you that Walter White from Breaking Bad is a chemistry teacher in New Mexico who does break bad and who does become his own drug boss, you really can't have an episode in which he doesn't do that, or an episode in which he questions that, or an episode in which he becomes nicer. That flies against the overall train or trajectory of the series. You want to be careful with that. You want to respect the overarching trajectory. And that's also useful here. Where do your characters start and where are they going to go? And it should be explained by the theme. The theme is really your theory. It explains what is going on in your story. And you want to be mindful of that as you're marshaling and organizing all of your characters. Let's move along. Settings. Where are we? Are we in the desert? Why are we in the desert? There is nothing in the desert. Why would you ever put us in the desert? Well, there are a few things here. You can use the environment to give your characters fuel. Your characters and story will inevitably interact with your story. That's true. But again, I ask you, why are we in a desert? Well, we could be in the desert for a few reasons. For one, maybe that's just where the story takes place. For instance, Aladdin, a Disney classic. And in fact, most recently they announced that they will be doing a live action version of Aladdin as well. That story takes place in the Middle East. It makes sense for it to be, surrounded by deserts, if not always in a desert. But a desert can also provide characters opportunities to talk to each other. Why? Because there's nothing else going on in the desert. Maybe this is an opportunity for two characters to have an intimate discussion because nothing else is going on, nothing else is around them, and it makes sense to. It could very well be. It could also be a way to emphasize characters are out of options, right? We've seen this in cartoons and in movies and in TV shows when characters are in the desert, they're at their last straw, or they're at their it's kind of rising action into almost a climax sometimes in which we're saying, what's going to happen with these guys? They have no options. I mean, it is barren. And so a desert can really serve as many, many different vehicles for characters. And so settings are places in which characters draw fuel from. And so when you set something somewhere, that's what the characters are pulling from. That's where they're getting their energy from. And so you want to be mindful of that when you're properly and carefully selecting settings for what happens. Does Jennifer tell Derek that she loves him at the school dance? After a football game? After a car accident? Why? Those are some of the questions you want to be asking yourself if that is a plot point you want to reveal. Settings can help underscore meaning, and so it's important to think about those things as you're moving along. Let's move along. Conflict. We need conflict. Conflict will aid you in determining future action, goals, and consequences of characters. It gives your audience a reason to watch. If there's no conflict, there's no issue, there's no problem, life just moves along, nobody has a reason to watch. And it doesn't have to be a bad conflict. It could be a good conflict. Maybe some of the characters are trying to make it to an award show on time. Or maybe some of the characters are so successful that they have to open up more smoothie stands or whatever the plot point might be. Characters may seek out revenge or resolution from a conflict. Moreover, conflict is an excellent way to build character profiles, as audience members can learn more about characters from conflict and tension. Nobody cares about what Walter White was going through on Breaking Bad when he was a healthy chemistry teacher. Whatever, dude. What happens when you have cancer and you're thrown, which is thrown at you as a curveball? What are you like then? What are you like when you find out that there are aliens that a laboratory has accidentally unleashed onto a town, like in Stranger Things? That's when there's interest, right? It's not when characters are doing well. What are you like when you're at your worst? What do you like when you're faced with an obstacle? What do you like when you're faced with a problem? Everything's easy when you're a millionaire and you're in good health. What happens when things are taken away from you or when you're given more? Those underpinnings help push stories along. And it's important to think about how we want to push our characters and poke and prod them to have them move along and to grapple with whatever obstacle they have in front of them. Let's move along. So in drama is meant to uncover unexpected events that are serious with tremendous import. The goal is to keep audiences needing to know more with drama. There might be some sort of tension between two brothers, and so they fight over a family business. But what you don't know is that one of the brothers actually married the other brother's former girlfriend and kind of took her away from him. That's more information. That feeds and fuels and informs why the two brothers don't like each other. Fair enough. We can build rising tension and we can leave items unanswered that will usher the audience along. Audiences need more information to resolve the conflict. Great. Watch the next episode. Dramatic characters often face obstacles. They face dilemmas. They have internal conflicts within themselves. Am I good enough? Am I wise enough? Am I sharp enough? Can I do this? A la Walter White in Breaking Bad becoming a drug lord. External conflicts. Walter White does have external conflicts with a drug cartel and relationships to other characters. Walter White's family doesn't know that he is literally breaking bad and becoming a drug lord. They have no idea until the final season. Let's move along. Comedy. Comedy is meant to unearth humor. It is meant to unearth unusual humor. What is humor? It is truth. But it is truth in weirdness. And so you might look at a clip and say that's funny, but chances are the comedy writers might say, you know what's really strange is when people just pick a lobster at a restaurant out and say, I want that, and it's killed. What a weird thing that we do at seafood restaurants. We just kind of go up to a glass and say, yep, he's the one who's going to die. Just like that. Just walk right in, and all of a sudden we're bestowing death upon animals via 10 seconds being in a restaurant. And the tank is there, and we're kind of like a king, and we look among the lobsters and we figure out which one deserves death. Well, along those lines, if you Google it, uh, SNL a few seasons ago with Peter Davison and John Mulaney did a skit about picking lobsters, and they merged it with the musical Les Mis. It was hysterical. Kenan Thompson played a lobster singing "Who Am I," who was about to die. It was really, really funny. But that's the thing. Comedy is funny because we think about what's true in life, but we think about weird things. Think about unusual things and heighten them. That's where a lot of the comedic effect comes from. And so, if you look at the movie Ghostbusters, comes to mind when they create that goofy first commercial for the Ghostbusters in the movie. The made for public access TV commercial is terrible, and it's terrible on purpose because it's kind of unusual how awful public access commercials are. They're kind of grainy, it's kind of awkward, it seems like not much is being pre-planned when people are filming a commercial. And so if you think about unusual things in life and heighten them, that's where laughs kind of come into play. Let's move along. So again, heightening in comedy. Finding the first unusual thing in a scene. When you're writing for comedy, you want to build out your scene by heightening it. Find something unusual and then heighten it further and further. For instance, I have taken a writing class at the Upright Citizens Brigade, which is an excellent, excellent improv studio here in New York City. And so I wrote a skit about a clown who wound up performing at funerals, because it's kind of odd, I think, to have a clown at a birthday party. Somebody who's painted and who just kind of does tricks and makes fun of kids and does stuff in front of them to celebrate somebody's existence in the world. That's kind of weird. We accept it for what it is, but it is kind of strange. What if we took that and put it into a funeral home and we had the clown, first blow a balloon of the deceased person's pet, and then we heighten it by maybe having him juggle urns or people's remains in front of the audience, right? We're building, we're building, we're building, we're building. We're heightening, we're heightening, we're heightening. We're making it more outrageous, more outrageous, more outrageous. If you start thinking about comedy in that way, you very well might have a slightly easier time writing it. I have limited experience doing it, but comedy is exceptionally hard, and I give a lot of credit to the writers out there who are able to do it far better than I. Let's move along. So, motivation. This is kind of the last portion of this with storytelling, but it by far and away is the most important. What's the motivation? Why are we even watching this? What's the motivation between Walter White, who we have here on the right, and Jesse Pinkman on the left, of course, of Breaking Bad? And so, what do they want? What's the point of your story? What are they trying to achieve? What are they up against? Consider what the motivation is. There must be a reason for ensuing action. And so we might have rising action, which is kind of after maybe the first initial conflict. So Walter White is diagnosed with, cancer. That's an obstacle for him. That's where the initial conflict kind of comes to play. What is he going to do? How is he going to pay for his bills, take care of his family after his death? And so really throughout the TV series, we have a long-standing rising action as we're going from chemistry teacher to drug lord. If we're watching a TV show, rising action might be, if we think of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Will Smith, or if we think of maybe a more recent example with Michael Scott in The Office, Michael Scott might realize that the office is cursed, and that was an episode in which Meredith wound up having rabies because Michael Scott hit Meredith with his car, and so there was a rabies walkathon as a result. So kind of the rising action is how we go from the initial conflict all the way up to the climax. The climax being, will the character resolve the resolution or will they not? When they're just about to do so. And a climax could be anything from a hero and a villain having a standoff, as we've seen in a lot of cartoons like The Lion King, right? When Simba is finally facing Scarface and they're about to fight, and there's thunder and there's rain and there's lightning. All of those things kind of come together and they serve as the final resolution for the story. A backstory is really useful here if it can help inform the story itself. It can help illuminate how these characters came to be and what insights they have. I'll never forget, it's either the first or second episode of Breaking Bad, Walter White is sitting in an empty classroom with another student, and they are breaking down what composes a human being. And it was juxtaposed against Jesse Pinkman evaporating or disintegrating a dead drug dealer who is in Walter White's house, or Jesse Pinkman's house. And so, Walter White is going through, the properties, the things that make up humans, water, carbon, and all of these other elements. And I think there were 2% or 3% that was missing from the chemical equation. And Walter White talked about having a soul. He talked about, having energy or having something else that makes us human that can't necessarily be quantified by chemistry. And so having that backstory, having that understanding, it humanizes Walter White, right? We know that Walter White kind of recognizes the soul. He recognizes people as being unique. He recognizes people as being something. And as being more than just bodies. Even though Walter White throughout the series will be killing a lot of people, he recognizes people are more than just pounds of flesh. It's a really interesting storytelling device, and Vince Gilligan and the rest of the Breaking Bad crew did an excellent job of highlighting that and underscoring that. So, to kind of wrap up everything, storytelling is a big deal, as you can see. We really have to think about heightening, we have to think about rising action, how we get from conflict to rising action all the way through to the climax. So rising action is maybe the hero's journey kind of along to resolve the conflict, and then climax, when they reach the ultimate moment of whether or not they will have resolution within that conflict. And we can see that through motivation and through heightening in comedy and giving audiences more information or withholding information from them in dramas, we're really able to pull and piece together a storytelling that is unique and that is personal and that really sucks in the audience to crave more. Well, that's all we have for Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.